scale back, find that small piece wherever you can find it, where you can actually get a foothold, find people of like minds who are enthusiastic, want it to work, and can actually make it work somewhere. And then you can build from there.
This is Jeff Standridge, and this is the Innovation Junkies podcast. If you want to drastically improve your business, learn proven growth strategies, and generate sustained results for your organization, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Innovation Junkies podcast. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Innovation Junkies podcast. My name is Jeff Standridge.
Hey, and this is Jeff Amrine. Glad to be back for another episode. What do we got happening today?
Well, we have a gentleman by the name of Greg Satell. He's a transformation and change expert, international keynote speaker, and the best-selling author of Cascades: How to Create a Movement That Drives Transformational Change. His previous book, Mapping Innovation, was selected as one of the best business books of 2017. He's a regular contributor to Harvard Business Review, and he's been featured in other A-list publications like Barron's, Forbes, and Fast Company. And he's consistently ranked as one of the top 5 of the top 40 innovation bloggers in the world. Greg Satell. Greg, glad to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff and Jeff.
We're the Jeffs.
Yeah, you only have to remember one first name on this deal. We try to keep it simple for our guests.
Yeah, and you both have beards and glasses. Like if you guys had a caricature, like you wouldn't be able to tell each other. You know, those caricature artists.
Which one of us is younger and better looking, right?
Well, and contrary to a lot of people's assumptions, even though we're both named Jeff, we're not related.
But if we were in West Virginia, there'd be some doubt about that. So.
My name's Jeff, and here's my brother Jeff. So
That's right. Hey, and while we're on the lighter side of things, Greg, one of the things we like to do as an icebreaker is to have kind of a random musing. And so today, the random musing is, what is your favorite junk food?
Well, there's a little bit of controversy there because I'm from Philadelphia, so we eat cheesesteaks. But in Philadelphia, they're not considered junk food. They're considered one of the major food groups. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's but hey, I always tell people, if you're ever in Philadelphia, the best cheesesteak in town is on me. So if you ever find yourself here, look me up.
So do you advise with or without?
You gotta have them with. I don't see the I mean yeah, absolutely.
And that's
really.
That's
and it's always
peppers, right?
Onions always with
onions. Okay, all right. It's been a while since I've been to Philly.
But I don't like the whiz. I don't.
No cheese whiz.
And don't go to Pat's or Geno's. That's just for the tourists, or when it's sort of late night, after the bars close, when you're good and drunk, you go.
No offense to Pat or Gino.
They won't be future sponsors.
Funny enough, I grew up with Pat. Well, my mother knew the family of Pat Oliveri, but they're long dead, of course.
Oh, I got you.
But
so we haven't
not to
offended
speak
them too bad.
ill of the dead.
So I would have to say probably one of my favorite junk foods, and I can't go to a Mexican restaurant and actually eat a meal because I fill up on the chips and salsa or the chips and queso, So I could sit and eat and munch around on those things all day, every day.
Man, this is a hard one for me because I've got kind of a 3-way tie, and so I'm going to indulge here and talk about all 3. One is traditional greasy, salty popcorn that you make at home, not with an air popper. I love that. Gigantic chocolate chip cookies that probably ought to be outlawed because of the number of calories per bite. But one of my all-time favorites, and this is both the south of the border U.S. and Canadian thing, we would call gravy fries, and my Canadian buddies would call it poutine. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could eat an entire, salad bowl full of that stuff. So
And
there you
you
have it.
actually have a fourth one, bourbon.
Yeah. And bourbon. Well, yeah, that was a controversy before the episode. I said, well, does bourbon count as a junk food? Because that would be high on the list for sure.
Well, I'm a big bourbon guy, and the interesting thing is that I spent a good deal of time in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. So, of course, everybody knows that vodka is very popular there, but bourbon is considered very sort of very fashionable. So if you drink bourbon, it's like very sophisticated, and of course very American and very new. Nobody drank bourbon in places like Ukraine or Moscow or Kiev or Warsaw or any of those places 30, 40 years ago. So it's sort
You'd
of
make lots of friends with a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, I guess.
But they're actually very sophisticated with the see a lot of Blantons over there, and so we're exporting American culture very
Efficiently.
very effectively.
Yeah, there you go. Well, let's talk
Good
about
segue to innovation, right?
There you go. That's right. Let's talk about Greg, you and your background a little bit. I talked about your short bio, if you will, but give us a little more depth into Greg Satell and who you are and what you do.
Well, I spent about half my adult life running media businesses in the former former Eastern Bloc countries, and then and then for the last 10 years, I've been really writing and speaking and consulting about innovation, but more recently, more focused on transformation. So getting change adopted and scaled.
So your book,
overcoming resistance.
Yeah, your book Cascades talks about creating a movement that drives transformational change. So talk to us a little bit about this concept of a movement, what it looks like, what it is, and how you create a movement.
Well, essentially, movements are about empowerment, right, rather than plan and direct. But what's sort of more interesting is kind of how I came to the Cascade research, which was I was running a major news organization during the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, and so. And I experienced those events in a almost unique way, in that as a foreigner, I was something, often considered less than a full participant, but in my role, running a major news organization, certainly more than a casual bystander. And what I remember most about those times is this feeling of incredible confusion. Nobody seemed to know what was going on or what would happen next. Not the journalists I would speak to in the newsroom every day, not the other business leaders, and not the political leaders. There was just this mysterious force that nobody could really describe, but nobody could deny, that was moving things along. And, what amazed me is how thousands of people who'd ordinarily be doing very different things would all of a sudden stop what they're doing and start doing the very same thing all at once in perfect unison. And I thought to myself at the time, gee, I'd really like to be able to do that. Here I am running this big company. I've got thousands of potential customers, all buying different things, but I want them to buy the one thing I'm trying to sell them. And I had, hundreds of employees that were smart, ambitious, bright people, full of their own ideas. But I wanted them to embrace the one or two uh, 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 initiatives that I thought needed to be priorities. But of course, I had no idea how to do any of that. But I had this feeling if I could just bottle what I saw on the streets of Kiev, I could do, that would be really powerful. And then a couple of years later, I came across some papers in network science, and I found that the scientists had known for years about this mysterious force and even had a name for it. It was called a network cascade. And because of some recent breakthroughs, we now know exactly how these things work. And so that's kind of what got me hooked on learning more about movements and applying them to organizations. And then I met my friend Surja, who overthrows countries pretty much for a living. That's his job. And he had created this repeatable model for overthrowing countries. And I said, well, what if we tried to apply that to a business context, to organizations and corporations and institutions? And that's what became the Cascades research. And what I found is not only does that work and very, very well, it seems to be the only thing that does work. And I didn't realize at the time that there was this kind of transformation crisis where 70 or 80% of organizational transformations fail. And they don't fail because people don't understand the change, but because if a change is important, it is there's always going to be certain people who don't like it, and they're going to work to undermine it in ways that are often dishonest and underhanded and deceptive. So that's what you need to overcome if you're going to really drive any transformational initiative within your organization. And so that's what became Cascades, and that's the work that we do.
It's very, very interesting, and we see that when we think about power maps and we think about strategic selling and different things that we advise on. There's always an element of informal leadership that can be either positive influencers and champions or saboteurs. What did you learn about how to turn those people, either turn or neutralize them when you want the movement to take hold? What are some key insights there?
So I'll just I'll I I'll throw a couple of things out very, very fast, and then we can unpack any which one you want. The first is that movements are about empowerment, right? So you want to start with people who are enthusiastic about the idea as you are. One of the things that we see, and one of the problems we see with traditional change management, is they usually start the initiative with a big communication program, like a big bang. The idea is to create a sense of urgency around change. And of course, that can rally people to your cause, but it also alerts those saboteurs that they better get started undermining you, or it might actually happen. So you want to start with the sort of mantra of the book is small groups, loosely connected, united with a shared purpose. So you want to start with a small group of enthusiasts and help them, empower them to be successful and to bring in others who can bring in others still. So one of the things we say is you always want to start with a majority, even if that majority is like 3 people in a room of 5. Majorities don't just rule, they also influence. And you can always expand a majority out. As soon as you're in the minority, you will immediately feel pushback. I mean, almost like a car in whiplash. And we've all felt that. Like you walk into the room and all of a sudden that idea is not okay anymore. And when that happens, you've gone too far and you have to retrench. Another really important concept is identifying on shared values. So great example of this is with agile transformations. So when people want to drive an agile transformation within an organization or evangelize agile methodology, more times than not, they start with uh, the agile manifesto, which of course is what makes people in the agile community passionate about agile, but means almost nothing to people outside the community and can seem more than a little bit strange and can turn a lot of people off. So instead of focusing on those differentiating uh, uh, values, you want to focus on shared values like better quality projects done faster and cheaper, becoming a high performing organization. So that's the second point, is shared values. Uh, the and A third point is you want to create co-optable resources. So things that allow people to take ownership of this change initiative and make it their own. And we have some tools as well, like the spectrum of allies and the pillars of support. But I'll stop there in terms of concepts. I think for your types of for your clients, I think those three concepts would all be very useful. But I'd also like to give you something to avoid, because this is something we see all the time. And that is that somebody high up in the organization comes up with an idea for change, usually somebody in the C-suite. And so they want to drive through a change initiative. They tap somebody like a high potential employee to lead this change initiative. They tell them that they've got the full backing of the board or the executive committee or whatever the powers that be, and they're given a budget and they're told to go forth and really push this through because it really needs to happen. And damn the torpedoes, all full speed ahead. And this person, they start, they do what they think they're supposed to do, which is go out guns blazing, start with a bang, have a big kickoff meeting, the whole thing. And about 6 months later, 6 to 12 months later, they realize that they've been undermined this whole time. Everything's sort of ground to to a halt. This change initiative that they thought was going to move their career into the sort of fast lane now threatens to derail it. That executive sponsorship has dissipated. They're on the hook for getting blamed for the whole thing, and that's usually when they come to us. And at that point, most of the time we actually can save them, but sometimes we can't. And it really doesn't need to happen that way if they start planning, doing actual change planning from the start.
Hey, folks, we'll be right back with the episode. But first, we want to tell you about a limited opportunity to take advantage of our Growth DX. For a limited time, we're offering a free strategy call to see whether our unique diagnostic tool is right for you. Go to innovationjunkie.com/growthdx to learn more.
You talked about shared values, Greg, and in your process, you have this concept of a genome of values. So unpack that concept of values a little bit further. You talk about you've got to change fundamental beliefs. And so talk a little bit about that a little more, if you would.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, values is probably the most overused term in business, especially when there's consultants in the room, right? So we always ask, we ask, okay, what are your values? And they say the usual thing. Well, the customers, we value excellence, we value all these very nice things. And then we ask, what do these values cost you? Because if they don't cost you anything, if they don't act as real constraints, they're not really values. They're just platitudes. One of my favorite examples of this was Lou Gerstner during the IBM turnaround in the 90s. where he really needed to be credible. And I've interviewed over the years probably a few dozen people from that period, from every levels of the organization. And all of them mentioned one thing. He said he valued the customer, but even more importantly, he made it clear he was willing to forego revenue on every sale. And that was the only thing that made it real. That's the only thing that made it credible, not only internally, but externally to customers and partners and everybody else. That and I never met a single person who worked in IBM from that time who thought that IBM would still be in business today if it wasn't for that. So that's the super important. That's the first step, is to identify what your values really are, or in other words, how are you willing to constrain yourself? What costs are you willing to bear to achieve your mission, to fulfill your purpose? Because if you don't if you don't know that, you haven't really thought it through. And other people, nobody else is, quite frankly, is going to take your change seriously. Much like Lou Gerstner, if he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have been taken seriously. Shared values is something different. So shared values is a subset of your values. So when you think of, and we call this the spectrum of allies, when you think of the sort of map, the terrain upon which the battle for change will be fought, and to be clear, it will always be a battle if the change is important and has the potential to affect people. So you want to map out who are your most active supporters, who are passive supporters, who's neutral, who's passively opposed, and who's actively opposed. And you want to think about what of those values will be shared out by at least 4 out of those 5 groups, and that's where you want to sell. Very much like when we were talking about agile, serving the customer is a shared value. Being a high performing organization is a shared value. Delivering projects on time and on budget is most of the time a shared value. But one of the things that we found that's really interesting is one of the best ways to identify shared values is actually listening to that to your most active opposition, to the people who hate the idea and who are trying to kill it. So, and here's the trick, and here's a discipline. You don't actually want to engage with those people, because remember, they're trying to undermine what you want to achieve, and that is most likely not going to be an honest engagement. But what you do want to do is you want to listen to them, because they will clue you in to, very often, to what the shared value is, because they're trying to convince a lot of the same people you are. So that's how you identify shared values, and then that's what you want to focus on. So if it's, I'll stick with the example of an agile transformation. If it's an agile transformation, not on those differentiating values of the agile manifesto, but that those shared values of performance and service and excellence and so on and so forth.
Very good. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say I had not.
When you say go ahead, Jeff, are you sure you're not talking to yourself?
I'm never sure.
Because like
that.
sometimes I'm like, Greg, we got to get this going. We got to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I'm trying to like psych myself up.
I'm never sure of anything I say.
But what I was gonna say is I've never heard anybody capture in the way you did the idea of of really considering what you're willing to sacrifice for a particular value. And it made me reflect on tough decisions we've had to make in another organization we run about what funding to pursue, because we pursue a lot of third-party funding for some of the stuff that we do in the startup venture ecosystem world, and what we'd have to sacrifice if we took it versus what we really valued in the long run. And ultimately, we kind of came to the conclusion that based on our vision and our purpose and our mission, there was some funding we just weren't going to take because it didn't align. And we were willing to sacrifice what would have been an easier road because the funding would have been secured for a number of years to stay true to the value that we had, which was to enable and empower innovators and entrepreneurs. And in some ways, it was freeing, even though there was the angst and the worry that, well, how are we going to support this thing going down the road? It was liberating to actually just make that decision and stay true to our purpose and our mission and not give up the autonomy. So maybe the value was the autonomy to choose our own direction at the behest of a funder that wanted to have a lot to say about what we did. So anyway, I mean, you articulated that better, that particular point better than I'd heard it before. It's really a good point.
But I screwed everything else up, right?
No, not yet. But we'll let you know if you do.
Well, what I want to do, we've been talking about creating movements that drive transformation. I'd like to talk a little bit and give our listeners a little bit of a glimpse of your preceding book called Mapping Innovation. So talk a little bit about the premise of that for our listeners as well.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I spent about 20 years running organizations. And like most people who run organizations, I felt an incredible pressure to innovate. But I wasn't quite sure on how to go about that. And whenever I looked for answers, it seemed like everybody had their own way of innovating. And when you looked at what one person did, like you would look at, let's say, design thinking, and you'd say, oh, wow, that really seems good because, Steve Jobs apparently loves it. And, IDEO has built this fantastic business around it. And Stanford has, an entire school dedicated to it. So, that must really be the best way to do it. And then you look at it and it says, okay, well, you identify your users' needs, and then you work back and you rapidly prototype and iterate towards a radically better solution. And you say, wow, that really seems smart. That must be how you do it, until you read Clayton Christensen and Disruptive Innovation and The Innovator's Dilemma. And he says that's exactly how good companies go out of business, because they listen too much to their customers when the basis of competition has shifted. And so, well, how can those two things be right? And then there's like open innovation and lean startups and, and basic research and on and on and on. And what I found was that, if there was ever anybody said, this is how you do it, somebody else who was equally or even more successful did it in a completely different way. So what I finally came up with was that innovation is really about solving problems, and there is many different different ways to innovate as there are different problems to solve. And along the way, I came up with an idea of an innovation matrix and a method for classifying problems so that you could identify the solution best fit to solve them. And in doing the work, what I found is that most organizations have one particular way in which they innovate, and they do pretty well, for a while, until they come up with a problem that doesn't fit. And then they just kind of spin their wheels, and they're not sure why, because this was the particular solution that had worked with them for often years, sometimes decades. but what they had inadvertently done was picked the solution and tried to make the problem fit that solution, rather than the other way around of identifying and classifying the problem and then adapting the solution to that. So we still do that work. We still work with clients on that, but our focus has somewhat shifted to the transformation, where that seems where today the greater need is on scaling and getting solutions adopted and scaled.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, it's been a pleasure hearing you talk about the movements that drive transformation, and then also getting a glimpse for our listeners of your mapping innovations work as well. One final question I have for you is maybe a short anecdote or what have you. If you talk about, you get called in a lot of times where executives thought they were going to be on the fast track. Their change initiative has stalled, and they see themselves kind of hanging in the balance, or their career hanging in the balance. Any particular anecdotes of maybe a particular situation, no names, of course, and how you guys walked in and helped them salvage that particular initiative?
We basically go back to the beginning and restart how we start, but they always get out in the same way. You need to find somewhere, someplace that you can actually show that this change works, and you need to identify people who are enthusiastic and want it to work, who will actually help you work through the inevitable glitches. One of the concepts we like to talk about is the hair on fire use case. So you don't want to look for, in marketing class, we were all told to look for the largest addressable market, where if you're doing something new and different, that can often kill you, actually. You want to find somebody who has a problem they need solved so badly they almost literally have their hair on fire. And if you can work with those people to actually make this change successful and solve a problem they actually have, then you have a base that you can build from, and you start there. So the first thing that you want to do is scale back, where you're not going to transform an entire organization all at once. Scale back, find that small piece wherever you can find it, where you can actually get a foothold. Find people of like minds who are enthusiastic, want it to work, and can actually make it work somewhere. And then you can build from there. Fantastic.
Well, Greg, it's been a pleasure having you with us today. We appreciate you for taking the time out of your, I know, hectic and busy schedule to join us here on the Innovation Junkies podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. And anytime you're in Philadelphia, best cheesesteak in town is on me, but don't go to Lincoln Financial Field wearing a Dallas Cowboys jersey. That's
yeah, I hear you.
That might be innovative, but it's not a path to success.
I got you. Well, Greg, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the Innovation Junkies podcast. Thanks for joining.
Hey folks, this is Jeff Amrine. We want to thank you for tuning in. We sincerely appreciate your time. If you're enjoying the Innovation Junkies podcast, please do us a huge favor. Click the subscribe button right now and please leave us a review. It would mean the world to both of us. And don't forget to share us on social media.